Dia has received numerous buffs thanks to Natlan, so today I thought it'd be cool to evaluate her current meta position. My name is Juice and let's get into it. First off, we should start with her kit feel. There's two main ways to play Dia, with Style 1 using her as an off-field support, and Style 2 using her as an on-field DPS. There's two main scenarios where you're going to use Dia as a support, Burgeon/Burning teams and Burn Melt teams. I'll evaluate her supportive performance in the three following teams as examples for today. Mualani Burn Vape teams, Knichi Burning teams, and within Ganyu Burn Melt teams. Then we'll cover her DPS playstyle. Okay, so starting with Mualani Burn Vape. She's an interesting pyro option in this team, and her pyro app does have a pretty wide radius, which is nice. She can hold 4-piece Cinder City in the team, but because she isn't an Outlaw character, you'll only give the Shark Surfer an extra 12% damage bonus. Still neat either way. Dia also has the interesting benefit of being a defensive option here, which is pretty helpful for these teams. I wouldn't say she's as strong as Xiangling in these comps, but Dia is most definitely getting the job done and feels fine to play. You can even run a Sack Greatsword on the Mercenary so that she can refresh her skill immediately when it's down for more pyro application, which is pretty neat. In Knichi teams, I find her quite comfortable to use. Because she's played as an off-field support, she is an excellent 4-piece Deepwood candidate to support Knichi's own numbers, if you don't know who to put Deepwood on. Because then, your Emily can still use 4-piece Reverie, and you don't have to sacrifice Xiangling's own damage. Her Pyromark works beautifully with Knichi's super movement heavy playstyle, and if you combine that with Xiangling's long-range Pyronado, then you'll have flames for days. If you've already got a Deepwood holder, however, you can once again apply good old 4-piece Intercity here. I also find her to be decent in Knichi Burgeon teams, but in these comps, I typically prefer to stick to Xiangling. You can never escape Xiangling impact. But when it comes to one of Dia's older roles, she's always been quite a neat unit for Ganyu Burn Melt. Nahida is able to keep burning up time going while providing EM from her passive, Dia is the provider of Pyro, Kazuha would swirl set Pyro to allow for an even stronger radius of Pyro application, and then it's all up to Ganyu to do all the DPS work. While Cinder City can work in this team, you'd have to make sure to trigger Melt so that Ganyu gets the cryo damage bonus percent. Plus, Dia can run 4-piece Tenacity here already, which is arguably going to be better than damage bonus percent in a Bennettless team. Speaking of that kid, Bennett is ultimately a better slot than Dia for this particular comp, but it's a viable use for her nonetheless, and it's fairly feasible to believe that your Bennett is already in use anyway. When it comes to your DPS-based teams, we'll have a look at Burning Dia, Burgeon Dia, Vape Dia, and Monopyro Dia. Burning Dia essentially takes advantage of Emily being a very delicious unit when burning is present. It's a direct upgrade to your previous Monopyro teams. Fang of the Mountain King, a new Claymore that provides burst and skill damage percent when burning is present, is also pretty nifty for Dia's personal damage, since her burst punches all count as burst damage, so Fang is a cool weapon for her here. Burgeon Dia can also take advantage of said weapon, and a little more on Burgeon comps, why don't we? Here, you run Farina as well for damage bonus percent and for the occasional Burgeon cores as well. The main advantage here is that Farina is also able to get Vaporizes. This is a fairly formidable DPS team for her, and I'd argue that it's stronger than her Burning variant. Her Dendro-based teams are lovely indeed. And if you don't have Emily, then you can opt for Burn Vape instead, using Nahida for her EM buff so that the Mercenary can trigger stronger vapes. This is also quite an effective method of utilizing her in Dendro-based teams. On a side note, it's really nice seeing Dia finally be the Pyro-based Dendro unit that we'd all thought she'd be way back in the day. You can still play her regular vape team, of course. Farina saves the day yet again, eh? It's solid enough. She'll pack a decent punch here, and if you've put a good amount of investment into the team, then you'll yield some decent results. Personally, I'm not sure why you'd want to play Monopyro other than shield breaking reasons anymore. She simply has way better teams now, and historically this was a team formed because she had such a severe lack of teams on release. It will still be fine, don't get me wrong, but you could literally plop either a Farina or Emily in here and get a significantly better team out. It'll still suffice, of course. I do think that she plays quite comfortably. If you're somebody who's not particularly down to play incredibly intense and complex combos, then have no fear because Dia is here. She's very simple to use with that incredibly straightforward burst of hers, and she's even more simple if you're opting for her support playstyle. I'm definitely fond of her kit feel, and it's absolutely a lot more enjoyable now that she actually has some bite to her punches. Yet, what of her constellations? Does she need them to feel good? Are they incredibly significant improvements to the character? Or can you get by just fine at C0? Let's analyze. Dia C1 is undeniably good for a DPS playstyle. It's actually quite a significant jump up if you're trying to play her as a damage dealer. She will still feel competent at C0 in said teams, of course, but this is certainly a big help. Consider yourself lucky if you're an aspiring Dia main that comes across this on the standard banner. Her C2 is nice for her support playstyle, since it increases the duration of her skill's power application. It does offer some nice extra damage for it as well, but I'd personally not let that deter you from building supportive sets in her supportive teams, such as 4-piece Deepwood and Kinich teams. Her support will still be more important for the comp's overall damage. This C3 is pretty significant for her if you're playing her as a DPS. It beefs up the main meat of Dia's kit if we're talking about damage. Neat. Great for a C4, really. Giving your energy back equals more bursts, which equals more damage. It's as simple as that. And while the self-healing might not seem like that big of a deal, remember, fanfare. This means that Dia can self-generate fanfare because she can heal herself consistently. This opens the door to some sustainless Dia teams, but you're usually going to want to play her with Bennett anyway. Still cool though. Though this doesn't apply to a supportive Dia, her later constellations certainly do tend more to your DPS playstyle. C5 boosts up her skill by +3, which isn't actually too bad for DPS Dia, because her C1 and 2 help out her skill's damage output as well. Cool. Her C6 is a massive crit stick, and this is the biggest jump for Dia in terms of DPS performance. At this stage, Dia will actually be a fairly competent DPS. You can still opt to play her in more supportive roles, of course, but at this stage, you can justify playing her as a DPS more seriously. I don't think she needs her constellations, for the record. They felt a lot more necessary in the past during the pre-Farina era, but I'd say that our C0 teams are quite good now. The anniversary selector is a yearly thing anyway, so if you don't manage to get a C1 Dia within the next year and you want to DPS her, then make that a long-term goal for yourself. Good constellations. Then I think it's important that we discuss her meta history. I feel like most people already know it by this point, so I'm not going to cover it super in-depth in this particular video, but I will briefly denote the tragedy that was Dia's past. Before she came out, we literally did not know that she was going to be a standard. This info was only known to us like a little bit before her release. And because she came out in 3.5, there were plenty of people who were waiting for this character to come, and it skipped many other members of the Sumeru cast waiting for Dia specifically. So you could imagine everybody's disappointment at that fact alone. But that isn't all. She was terrible on release. Testing at the time showed that a Mono Pyro Xinyan literally outperformed a C0 Dia. Take that with a grain of salt since she was new at the time, but it's pretty insulting that the two were even comparable. Ganyu Burnmelt was literally her only good team, and if you wanted to use her as a DPS, yeah, good luck with that. She was literally one of the worst characters in the game on her release patch. And nobody understood why this happened. Dia was a very popular Sumeru character, so it made no sense as to why her performance was so poor, especially when she would have been perfect for taking care of the game's pyro-related danger reactions. The D in Dia stood for disappointment, because nobody was happy with how her kit turned out. Plus, the kit itself was just weird. It couldn't decide whether it wanted to be supportive or DPS-like, and to be honest, that's still the case now, but at least currently, workarounds did appear. Farina was the first major one, finally offering her the ability to have much better vaporized teams. These were far more formidable than her old DPS teams, and this emphasized the value of Dia C1 even more. It was a neat little buff that Dia mains could relish in. There was also Dia being able to act as a defensive option in Lenny Mono Pyro, but this is more of a niche choice. The true buffs came along in Notlan, where Dia finally got to see some proper buffs. 4-piece Cinder City made her a much more useful support, since teams that are more HP scaling, such as Nervalette teams, were able to get damage bonus percent because of 4-piece Cinder City. With that being said, it also made her more useful as a support in teams where she already worked. Not to mention how nice it is that Burning and Burgeon became way more relevant. Dia is really solid with both of the current new Notlan characters. Firstly with Mualani because she's HP scaling and movement heavy, and then with Kinich because he's so movement heavy to the point of being considered a ranged character. Her qualities are actually desirable in teams now. And while her DPS playstyle might not be as strong as her supportive one, especially at C0, she is more than competent now with characters like Farina and Emily having come out as a neat concession to her. She went from being a borderline worthless unit to a character that's really worth considering for modern teams. When it comes to Dia's overall meta standing, I would say she's in the realm of being a decent alternative choice. There's always gonna be other characters that you can play over Dia. Arlecchino's Vape teams, Mono Pyro teams, and Burning teams make all of Dia's DPS teams look like a joke. And Xiangling is all you're ever really gonna need in terms of an off-field pyro support, not to mention the recent rise of Thoma. However, that's not really the point. She is now usable to quite a solid extent, and people who love her can now actually use her. With that being said, the D in Dia now stands for decent. I do think it's worth praising how this character went from being a completely bottom of the barrel pick to being a unit that's actually quite noteworthy. Sure, there are always going to be other better options, but as I have said many times in previous videos, every Genshin character should at the very least be useful, and I think Dia does offer useful qualities in teams that you can slot her into. It does make me happy that we have quite a few solid standard units. Jean is really amazing, Diluc is quite a solid DPS of Xianya, Greg's a pretty neat spread unit, and now Dia can be considered a formidable burn vape support. This character has really been through it all, and she has such an interesting reputation in the community. I wouldn't be surprised if there were still thousands upon thousands of people out there who still viewed her as unplayable trash, simply because that message was so permeated throughout the community back in the day. But now you know the great truth. That being that Dia has been properly buffed by Notlan and actually has some decent use cases now. A lot of people are going to own her after the 5.0 standard selector, and for those of you that own her, enjoy your shiny new Dia to the fullest. Hopefully this video was able to update you on Dia's current position in the meta. This has been Juice, signing out, and it's pretty coincidental that we have 2 standard women that happen to be fake cat girls.